Have you ever felt that tightness in your chest when someone looks you in the eyes and you know you're hearing a lie? That chill down your spine? That feeling that something doesn't add up? Well, today I'm going to show you the 3 signs that CIA agents observe to identify liars. And the best part, you don't need to be an expert in body language for this to work. Just 3 signs: simple, direct, and devastating. These signs work because every liar makes the same basic mistakes. And when you know what to look for, it's impossible not to notice. Stay until the end, because the 3rd sign is the most powerful of all. It alone has revealed lies that took years to be discovered. Let's go? Before I show you the 3 signs, you need to understand something. The CIA doesn't train its agents to read minds. They train them to observe behaviors. And you know what they discovered after decades interrogating spies, informants, and criminals? That liars always leave traces. Always. The problem is that most people look for the wrong signs. We pay attention to things like looking away, touching your hair, scratching your nose. But those things, they're secondary. Anyone can control that. What really gives away a liar are 3 specific behaviors that the brain does automatically when it's inventing a story. And it's these behaviors that CIA agents were trained to identify in fractions of a second. So, listen up. If you suspect someone is deceiving you, it could be your partner, your friend, your coworker. These 3 signs will give you the answer. And look, it doesn't matter how good someone is at lying. These signs appear. Always. Let's go to the first one. Sign number 1. Temporal inconsistencies in the narrative. Sounds complicated, but it's simple. Let me explain. When you live something real, your brain records that memory on a natural timeline. You remember what happened first, then, and last. The sequence makes sense because you lived it. But when you invent a story, you don't build a memory. You build a narrative. And narratives have holes. CIA agents know this, so they observe something very specific. Can the person maintain chronological consistency when talking about the event? Here's what you need to look for. First, does the person change the order of events when they tell the story again? For example, the first time they said they got home, took a shower, and then had dinner. But the second time, they say they had dinner, then got home and took a shower. This happens because their brain is creating in real time, not remembering. And it's impossible to keep a complex lie in the same order always. Second, does the person add or remove temporal details between one telling and another? Like, I left at 8 becomes, I left around 8:30, maybe 9. Liars do this because they're not sure of the details they invented, so they try to adjust as they speak. Third, do they have difficulty answering questions about what came before or what came after? If you ask, and before that, what were you doing? Does the person freeze, hesitate a lot, or give a vague answer? This is because the lie was built only for that specific moment. They didn't create a before and after in the story. A person telling the truth might hesitate, but they can reconstruct the timeline because they actually lived it. The memory is there, complete. A liar? They need to invent the timeline every time you ask, and it's impossible to do that perfectly. So the first sign the CIA observes is, does the story change its temporal structure? If yes, something is wrong. Sign number 2, absence of secondary sensory details. This one is brilliant. Let me explain. When you live a real experience, your brain doesn't just record the main event. It also records the details around it. Details you weren't even consciously paying attention to, but that got registered. For example, you remember a specific day you went to the movies. You remember the film, right? But if someone asks you, you can also remember things like, was it cold in the theater? Was someone talking behind you? What were you wearing? The smell of popcorn? Those are secondary sensory details, and they appear naturally when you're telling a true story. But liars don't create those details. Why? Because they're too focused on building the main story. They don't have the mental capacity to also invent the details around it. CIA agents know this, so they observe. Does the person spontaneously mention sensory details that aren't essential to the story? Here's what you should look for. First, does the person talk about sounds, smells, temperature, textures? For example, it was unbearably hot that day, or there was a dog barking all the time on the street. Those details don't matter for the main story, but they appear naturally when you lived it. Second, are those details mentioned naturally or do they seem forced? Smart liars try to add details, but they sound rehearsed, like it was a sunny day, exactly 25 degrees, and there were birds singing. Sounds fake, right? Because nobody remembers irrelevant details with that precision, unless they're making it up. Third, when you ask about secondary details, does the person answer easily or get confused? If you ask, "And what was the weather like that day?" the person who lived it will answer, "Oh, it was raining. I remember my shoes got all wet." But the liar will stutter, Weather? I think it was cloudy. I don't really remember." Real memories come in a complete package. Main event plus secondary details. Lies come only with the main event. So the second sign the CIA observes is, are natural sensory details missing? If the story is too clean, without the noise of real life, it's a lie. Sign number 3, emotionally distanced language. This is the most powerful one, and the hardest to fake. Let me explain how it works. When you tell a story you actually lived, especially if it was something important or emotionally charged, you use language that reflects your emotions from that moment. You say things like, "I got so angry," or "I felt terrible fear," or "It was the funniest thing I've ever seen." And there's more. You use past tense verbs that connect you to the event, like "I saw," "I felt," "I thought," "I said." But liars do something different. They use distanced language. Why? Because unconsciously, they want to distance themselves from the lie. It's as if their brain knows that it's false and tries to create distance. CIA agents know this. And they observe something very specific in the way the person speaks. Here's what to look for. First, does the person avoid using "I"? Pay attention to this. Liars tend to use impersonal constructions. Instead of saying, "I went to the bank," they say, "A trip to the bank was made," or "We went to the bank." Seems subtle, but that change reveals the psychological discomfort with the lie. Second, does the person use little emotional language? Like, if someone is telling about a supposedly happy moment, but speaks in a totally neutral way, without enthusiasm, without emotional expressions, something is wrong. Because when you remember something that really affected you emotionally, that emotion resurfaces when you tell it. It's automatic. Third, is the story told in a very formal or elaborate way? Liars try to sell the lie. So they use more convoluted language, more careful, more constructed. But real memories are told naturally, sometimes messy, with pauses, with "like," with "you know." It's human. Look at the contrast. Lie. On the aforementioned day, I proceeded to the commercial establishment where I conducted the necessary purchases. Truth. Dude, I went to the store and it was crazy busy there, so I... See the difference? One sounds constructed, the other sounds lived. And there's a final detail. Liars avoid talking about their internal feelings during the event. They describe actions, but not emotions. A person who lived a difficult situation will say, I was so scared my hands were shaking. A liar will say, I went there and did what had to be done. So the third sign the CIA observes is, does the person distance themselves emotionally from their own story? If they tell it like a report and not a lived experience, it's a lie. So recapping, you have 3 powerful signs that the CIA uses. First, temporal inconsistencies. Does the story change order or temporal details? It's a lie. Second, absence of secondary sensory details. Does the story lack the noise of real life? It's a lie. Third, emotionally distanced language. Does the person tell it like a report and not an experience? It's a lie. These 3 signs, together, are practically infallible. Obviously, you need to observe all 3 together. One isolated sign might just be nervousness or tiredness. But when 2 or 3 appear together, then you have your answer. And look, these techniques are based on decades of research in behavioral analysis. The CIA doesn't use guesswork. They use science. Now you know. Use it wisely. And remember, the truth always appears when you know where to look.